The rain fell like shattered glass against the cracked pavement of Chicago's South Loop, turning every streetlight into a trembling reflection. It was the kind of night no one should be outside, a night that swallowed sound, warmth, and hope. But through the downpour came a voice so small, so raw with terror it could pierce even the noise of the storm. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk." The cry didn't sound like it came from a man or even a teenager. It was the voice of a child. If you were there, would you have stopped? Would you have risked everything to help a stranger in the dark? Drop a comment below, because what happened next would change two young lives forever. Maya was 8 years old and invisible to most of the city. She had lived under the railroad bridge for months, surviving on scraps from Murphy's diner and warmth from cardboard walls. Life had taught her one lesson: stay unseen. People only looked at you when they wanted something. But that night, the voice broke through everything she believed. She stepped out from her shelter barefoot on the cold concrete, the rain soaking through her patched jacket. Ahead, under the flicker of a dying street lamp, a boy no older than 12 dragged himself across the pavement, his hands raw and bleeding. His clothes hung in tatters, his hair matted to his forehead. One look at his legs, twisted and swollen, made Maya's stomach turn. He flinched when she got closer, his wide gray eyes wild with panic. Please don't hurt me," he whispered again. "They'll come back. They always come back." Maya froze. Everything in her told her to run. In the alleys of Chicago, helping the wrong person could get you killed. But something about this boy, his broken voice, the way his body shook, even when the rain had turned to mist, made her stay. "I'm not gonna hurt you," she said softly. "See? I'm just a kid like you." She raised her hands, palms open. He watched her for a moment that felt like forever, then gave a tiny nod, collapsing onto the wet ground. When she tried to lift him, his weight nearly knocked her over. He was bigger than her, but so light it felt wrong, like he'd been starved for months. Step by step, she half dragged, half carried him toward the abandoned basement she called home. The whole way he kept mumbling through the rain. "They said I couldn't leave. They said I'd never make it." Maya didn't understand who they were, but she knew one thing: if she didn't move faster, whoever hurt him might find them both. Inside the basement, she lit a small candle stub. The boy's face came into view, bruised jaw, split lip, eyes too old for someone his age. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated, searching his mind as if his own name was a secret he wasn't allowed to say. "Ethan," he whispered finally. "I think." Maya gave him the last can of soup she'd been saving for herself. "You can think clearer when you eat," she said. He stared at the can like it was treasure. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Maya shrugged. "Because once I wished someone would help me too, but nobody did." He smiled weakly, a flicker of gratitude breaking through the fear. For the first time, she noticed the chain around his neck, a small metal tag with faint letters that looked expensive, foreign to the world of dirty sidewalks and soup cans. "What's that?" she asked. He looked down, touching it with trembling fingers. "It used to have my name on it," he said. "But they scratched it off." Outside, thunder rolled again. A siren wailed in the distance, closer this time. Maya froze, her instincts returning in a rush. "Who's looking for you, Ethan?" The boy's eyes darted to the window. "Bad people," he whispered. "They said if I ever tried to leave, they'd find me." His voice cracked, and for a second she saw the full terror inside him, years of it pressed down so deep it barely had a voice anymore. Maya's chest ached. No child should sound like that. She grabbed an old blanket and pulled it over him. "They won't find you here," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "You're safe now." He tried to speak again, but his eyes rolled back from exhaustion. Within seconds he was asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. Maya sat beside him, listening to the rain tap against the cracked windows, every drop like a ticking clock counting down to something she couldn't see. When dawn came, the candle had burned out. Ethan stirred, his face pale and feverish. Maya placed a damp cloth on his forehead and whispered, "You gotta hang on, okay?" But even as she said it, she noticed movement through the slits of the boarded window. 3 men in dark coats scanning the alley. One of them bent down, touching the ground, then pointed toward the basement. Her stomach dropped. They were looking for him. Maya's heart pounded so hard she thought it would wake Ethan. She crept to the window, her small hands shaking. The men spoke into radios, and though she couldn't hear the words, the look on their faces told her everything. This wasn't the police. This was something else. Something worse. She turned back to Ethan, who lay trembling in his sleep. He'd trusted her, given her his last bit of hope. She had 2 choices run now, and save herself or stay and fight for a boy she barely knew. Maya took one last look at the gray sky beyond the window, then whispered to herself, "Not again. Not this time." She grabbed her old backpack stuffed in what little food she had and reached for Ethan's hand. "Come on," she murmured, her voice trembling but firm. "We're getting out of here." The rain had slowed to a drizzle as she pulled him toward the stairwell, his weak frame leaning on her shoulder. Every step echoed like thunder in the silence. Somewhere above them, a door slammed. Footsteps followed. Maya looked up into the dim light, her heart in her throat. "Please, Ethan," whispered hoarsely. "Don't let them take me back." She tightened her grip on his hand. "They won't," she said, her voice breaking but certain. "Not while I'm alive." And with that, 2 children disappeared into the dawn. One running from a nightmare, the other running toward her first act of courage. Neither of them knew it yet, but that desperate night in the rain was only the beginning of a story that would shake the city and expose secrets buried far deeper than either of them could imagine. The basement smelled of rust and rain-soaked brick, but to Maya it was safer than the streets above. She sat near Ethan, who lay half-covered in an old blanket, shivering in his sleep. Every few minutes he whimpered softly, like someone reliving a nightmare he couldn't escape. Maya didn't sleep. She couldn't. Her eyes kept darting toward the cracked window, expecting the men in dark coats to appear again. When dawn came, she knew staying there meant death. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped leaving behind the gray chill that always followed a Chicago storm. Maya tore strips from her jacket to make a makeshift bandage for Ethan's legs. The swelling was worse now, angry red skin heat radiating through the bruises. He tried to hide his pain, biting his lip until it bled, but she could see it in the way his fingers dug into the floor. "You need a doctor," she whispered. "No hospitals," he said instantly, his voice sharp with fear. "They have people there. That's how they found me before." Maya didn't understand, but she believed him. She had learned to trust instinct over logic. Instinct was what kept kids like her alive. "Then I'll find someone who doesn't ask questions," she said. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, dull with fever. "Why are you helping me?" he asked again, his voice barely audible. "Because nobody helped me when I needed it," she said simply. "So I promised myself, if I ever could, I'd help someone else." That promise was the only thing holding her together. She wrapped his legs tighter, gave him the last bit of water she had, and decided to find Sister Claire, the old woman who ran the soup kitchen near South Loop. Claire was one of the few people in the city who didn't look at Maya like she was invisible. If anyone could help, it was her. Before leaving, Maya crouched next to Ethan. "I'll be back before sunset," she said. "You'll hear me knock 3 times, then 2 more. Don't open the door for anyone else." He nodded weakly, and with trembling fingers reached into his torn pocket. "If I don't make it," he said, pulling out a small silver tag, "give this to my dad. Tell him I never stopped believing he'd come for me." The tag was smooth worn from years of being held. On one side, barely visible under the scratches, were the engraved words, "To my little lion, love Dad." Maya swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "You'll tell him yourself," she said, closing his hand around it. "I promise." The streets were quieter than usual when she stepped outside. The storm had washed away the grime, but not the danger. She moved through alleys and side streets, keeping her head down. Years on the streets had made her small and quick, good at disappearing. When she reached the back of St. Mary's Mission, she knocked twice. The old wooden door creaked open, and Sister Claire's tired face appeared. "Maya," she whispered. "Child, where have you been? You look frozen." "I need help," Maya said. "There's a boy. He's hurt bad, his legs are broken or worse. But we can't go to a hospital." Claire studied her, seeing the urgency in her eyes. "Come inside," she said gently. "Tell me everything." The warmth of the soup kitchen hit her like a wave. The smell of bread and onions filled the air. Maya explained everything: the boy, the men, the fear in his eyes, the tag with the scratched-off name. Sister Claire's expression changed from concern to quiet alarm. "Sterling?" she murmured when Maya mentioned the word engraved on the metal. "I've heard that name before." "Who is he?" Maya asked. Claire hesitated. "David Sterling," she said finally. "He's a CEO. His son went missing 7 years ago. There were headlines for months until the story disappeared." Maya blinked. "You mean Ethan? He's that boy." Claire sighed. "If what you're saying is true, he's been through more than any child should endure." Before Maya could respond, the front door burst open. 3 men in heavy coats stepped inside, dripping water onto the tile floor. Their eyes scanned the room. The tallest one spoke first. "We're looking for a boy," he said smoothly. "About 12, dark hair, might be with a blonde girl." "You seen them?" Claire's expression didn't change. "We serve dozens of children every day," she said calmly. "You'll need to be more specific." The man smiled without warmth. "He's injured. Broke both legs. He's our nephew, ran away after an argument. We just want to bring him home." Claire met his gaze evenly. "If I see him, I'll contact the police." The man's smile vanished. "You don't want to get in our way, sister." Maya's heart pounded. She crouched behind a counter, clutching her backpack, praying they wouldn't see her. Claire didn't flinch. "This is a house of God," she said, her voice firm. "You'll leave now, or I'll call those same police you pretend to be afraid of." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the man stepped back. "He can't hide forever," he said coldly. "Tell him that. We always get what belongs to us." When they were gone, Maya crawled out, shaking. Claire closed the door, locking it. "That boy isn't going back to them," she said firmly. "Neither are you." She picked up the phone. "There's a detective I trust, Noah Grant. He's helped me before. He won't call the press and he won't betray a child." "Are you sure?" Maya asked. "Ethan said the bad people have cops too." Claire looked at her with the calm certainty that only age could bring. "Then it's time we find out which ones are still good." An hour later, Detective Grant arrived, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a badge that looked older than him. He listened without interrupting as Maya told her story again. When she showed him the silver tag, something shifted in his expression. "Where is the boy now?" he asked. "Safe," Maya said. "For now." Grant nodded. "I've been tracking a trafficking ring for years," he said quietly. "If this boy is who I think he is, he's the key to bringing the whole thing down." Maya felt a spark of hope, small, but real. "Then we have to protect him," she said. Grant gave her a steady look. "We will. But Maya, if they find out he's alive, things will move fast, dangerous fast." Maya glanced toward the window, where the rain had started again, tapping lightly against the glass. "Then we better move faster," she said. By the time she returned to the basement, night had fallen. Ethan was still there, pale and feverish, the candle nearly gone. She knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead. "I found someone," she whispered. "He's coming to help. Just hang on a little longer." Ethan's eyes fluttered open, clouded with exhaustion. "Did you keep your promise?" he murmured. Maya smiled through the tears she didn't realize she'd been holding back. "Yeah," she said softly. "I kept it. And I'm not breaking it now." Outside, a siren wailed again, this time closer, louder, and carrying a note of hope instead of fear. For the first time since the night she found him, Maya believed that maybe the darkness wouldn't last forever. David Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his Manhattan office, the skyline reflected in the glass like a city made of ghosts. 7 years had passed, yet every morning began the same way with the photo of a laughing 5-year-old boy on his desk. Ethan's chocolate-smeared smile looked so alive that some days David almost believed he'd walk through the door again. But he never did. Not after that afternoon in the backyard, not after the ransom call, not after the silence that followed. The world had moved on, but David never did. He had built his fortune on precision, on finding solutions where others saw dead ends. But this was the one problem he couldn't solve. He had spent millions on private investigators, digital trackers, and even cyber forensics that could trace hidden networks across continents. Each new lead had promised salvation and ended in heartbreak. The media had called him obsessed. His board had called him unstable. None of it mattered. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was looking for his son. That morning, the door to his office opened quietly. Margaret, his longtime assistant, entered with a folder pressed to her chest. "There's someone here to see you," she said softly. "Detective Noah Grant." David froze. The name sounded familiar. Grant had worked on Ethan's case years ago before the investigation was shut down for lack of evidence. "Send him in," David said. Grant walked in with the weariness of a man who had seen too many cases end badly. "Mr. Sterling," he began, "I need you to listen carefully. I think we found something. Someone." David's breath caught. He'd heard these words too many times, and every time hope had turned to dust. But there was something different in Grant's tone. Steady. Certain. He slid a photo across the desk. It was grainy, taken in poor light, but David's world stopped when he saw the boy's face. He was older, thinner, haunted, but the eyes were the same. His son's eyes, where David asked, his voice a whisper. "South Loop, Chicago." "A soup kitchen run by a Sister Claire Grant," replied. A homeless girl brought him in, said he was injured, terrified. He called himself Ethan. David didn't wait to hear more. Within hours, his private jet was in the air. Every heartbeat felt like a lifetime. By the time the car pulled up to the mission night had fallen. Sister Claire stood waiting, her hands clasped tightly. "He's alive," she said softly, "and he's been through hell." She led him through the narrow alley behind the church, down into an old storage room where a small lamp flickered. And there he was, Ethan lying on a cot, his legs wrapped in bandages, his face pale but unmistakable. For a long moment, David couldn't move. His throat closed, his hands trembled. Then Ethan stirred, eyes fluttering open, confused by the figure standing before him. "Ethan," David said, barely able to speak. "It's me, Dad." The boy blinked, disoriented. "You're not real," he whispered. "They told me you weren't coming." David fell to his knees beside the cot, tears spilling freely. "I never stopped looking, son. Not for one day." He reached out slowly, afraid that any sudden move would make the boy vanish. When Ethan didn't pull away, David wrapped him in his arms, holding him as if 7 years of absence could be erased by sheer force of will. Ethan sobbed quietly against his father's chest, the sound small and broken, yet it was the most beautiful sound David had ever heard. When the tears finally slowed, David noticed the silver tag around Ethan's neck, the one he'd given him on his 5th birthday. The words, "To my little lion love, Dad," were still faintly visible under the scratches. It was like finding proof that time hadn't completely destroyed what they were. Sister Claire's voice broke the silence. "There's more, Mr. Sterling. Whoever had him, they were part of something organized, dangerous." David turned to Grant, who nodded grimly. "We've been tracking a trafficking ring that uses shell corporations to move kids across state lines. The van Ethan escaped from belonged to one of them. They won't stop looking." Ethan tensed at the words, his grip on his father's hand tightening. David placed a hand over his son's. "They're not taking you again," he said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." The next hours passed in a blur. An ambulance came, but Ethan refused to go until David promised he'd stay beside him. At the hospital, doctors confirmed multiple fractures, old scars, and signs of long-term neglect. David stayed awake through the night, sitting by his son's bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO or a man carrying a billion-dollar empire. He was just a father who had finally found his child. When dawn broke, Grant returned with news that chilled the room. "Mr. Sterling, we've intercepted chatter. The people who took your son know he's alive. They're moving fast." David's exhaustion turned to resolve. "Then so will we," he said. "I want security on every floor, surveillance-safe transport, whatever it takes." Ethan's stirred eyes half open. "They'll come," he murmured. "They always come." David bent close, brushing the hair from his son's forehead. "Then let them. I've been waiting for them for 7 years." Later, when Ethan was finally asleep, David stepped into the hallway. Sister Claire waited there, her rosary dangling between her fingers. "You can't fight monsters with money alone," she said quietly. "No," David replied, looking through the glass door at his sleeping son. "But you can fight for what money can't buy: hope, justice, and a future." He knew this was far from over. The people who had taken Ethan were still out there. But as he watched his son breathe fragile and real, David made a silent vow. Whatever it cost whoever stood in his way, he would burn the world down before he let them touch his boy again. For 7 years, he had lived with nothing but loss. Tonight, for the first time, he had something to fight for, and he wasn't stopping now. The morning after the reunion, the world outside looked calm, an illusion that shattered before noon. David Sterling had planned to move Ethan from the hospital to a private recovery suite within hours, but Grant's warning still echoed in his mind. They know he's alive. The moment the sun climbed above the skyline, the first threat arrived. The security team intercepted an encrypted message sent to the hospital network, a traceable code linked to a known trafficking organization. It read simply, "Return what belongs to us." By midday, David's instincts told him what logic already confirmed: this wasn't over. He pulled Sister Claire and Detective Grant into a conference room, shutting the door. "We need to disappear," he said. Grant nodded grimly. "They've got eyes everywhere. Your company's been infiltrated." David's jaw tightened. "What do you mean, my company?" Grant placed a folder on the table. "Your own vice chairman, Lucas Gray, has ties to offshore accounts that match the trafficking network. He's been using Sterling Tech's logistics division to move kids under the guise of humanitarian supply shipments." The words hit David like a blade. Lucas had been his partner for 15 years, the man who helped him rebuild the company after Ethan vanished. "You're saying Lucas knew Grant didn't flinch?" "Not just knew. He financed part of it." While the hospital bustled outside, the three of them formed a plan. Maya, still by Ethan's side, refused to leave him. She had barely slept since the rescue, keeping a damp cloth on his forehead, whispering that everything would be okay. When David entered the room, she looked up with defiant eyes, the kind only kids who'd learned to fight for survival carried. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "But not for long. I promise you that." That night, as the city lights shimmered beyond the windows, the attack came. A blackout struck the entire hospital wing. Within seconds, the monitors went dead. Alarms silenced. David barely had time to react before the first explosion ripped through the lower floor. Smoke filled the hallway, the acrid scent of burning wires mixing with panic. Grant burst through the door, gun drawn. "We have to move now," he shouted. Maya helped David lift Ethan from the bed, wrapping the blanket around him as the emergency lights flickered weakly. Every instinct told David to run, but his mind stayed cold-focused. He knew this wasn't random, it was surgical. Someone had cut power-disabled security feeds and jammed radio frequencies. As they made their way through the service corridor, a shadow appeared at the end of the hall, one of the attackers dressed in a stolen EMT uniform. The man raised his weapon, but Maya moved first. She hurled a metal tray, the sound echoing as Grant fired once, dropping the man before he could shoot. "You're a brave kid," Grant said, breathless. "You have no idea," she replied. They escaped through a side stairwell, emerging into the parking lot where a black SUV waited. David climbed in with Ethan in his arms, Grant taking the wheel. As the vehicle sped into the night, the hospital behind them burned flames, licking at the windows like ghosts of everything they'd just escaped. Hours later, they reached an isolated farmhouse on the outskirts of Illinois, a safe house Grant had used during past investigations. The moment they arrived, Ethan was placed on a portable cot. His breathing was shallow, the stress taking a toll. Maya sat beside him, holding his hand. "We're safe now," she whispered. But David knew better. Safe was temporary. At dawn, Grant received a call from a federal contact. "The department's moving in," the voice said. "We've been tracking Gray's network for years, but your case just blew it open. You've got enough to bring them down, but you'll need to move fast before he buries the evidence." David didn't wait for authorization. By noon, his personal cybersecurity team joined forces with Grant's task force, tracing financial records, encrypted emails, and offshore transfers. What they found was staggering. Sterling Tech's infrastructure had been weaponized, its supply chains rerouted through shell companies in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. Lucas Gray wasn't just laundering money, he was trafficking human lives for profit. Maya, curious and fearless, hovered behind Grant's computer station. "Can I help?" she asked. He glanced back, ready to refuse, but she pointed to a familiar logo on one of the intercepted files. "That's from a laptop I saw before the night I found Ethan." Her observation cracked open a major lead revealing the primary transfer hub in Milwaukee. The raid was swift and brutal. Coordinated by Grant's federal allies, 17 locations were hit simultaneously. Dozens of children were rescued, and with each name added to the survivor list, the weight of what had been hidden under Sterling Tech's success grew heavier. Lucas Gray was arrested in his penthouse, found with documents linking him directly to every financial transfer. When the news broke, media outlets erupted. Sterling Tech scandal uncovered human trafficking network tied to top executives. Reporters flooded the streets outside the Manhattan headquarters demanding answers. David stood before the cameras that evening, his face drawn but resolute. "I built a company to change the world," he said. "I never imagined it was being used to destroy lives. That ends tonight." Behind the scenes, Ethan's condition worsened. The physical toll of years in captivity and the recent trauma pushed his fragile body to its limits. Doctors from a secure federal clinic were flown in. David held his son's hand, whispering promises he refused to break again. Maya sat beside them. Exhaustion etched into her young face, her small hand resting over theirs. When Grant entered with the final report, his voice was steady but somber. "It's over. We've shut them down. 83 kids rescued. Hundreds more will never be hurt again." David nodded slowly. "Then we did it." Grant looked at him. "You did more than that. You turned your pain into a war they couldn't win." As night fell, David stepped outside the farmhouse. The fields stretched endlessly, lit only by the glow of distant stars. For the first time in years, he could breathe. But deep down, he knew peace wouldn't come easily. The world had seen his victory, but the scars left behind in his son's body and that little girl's heart were the true cost of the war they had just fought in the dark. Winter came quietly that year, blanketing Illinois in a hush that felt almost sacred. For the first time in 7 years, David Sterling woke each morning not to the sound of nightmares, but to the steady rhythm of his son breathing in the next room. The farmhouse that had once been their hiding place was now their sanctuary. It wasn't luxury or comfort that made it feel like home. It was peace, fragile but real. Ethan's recovery was slow. He spent months in physical therapy, learning to walk again with the help of braces and determination that humbled every adult who watched him. Some days were good, others were not. There were mornings when he couldn't move without pain, and nights when the nightmares dragged him back to the basement he'd escaped. But each time David was there holding him through the worst of it, whispering the same promise he'd made the night they reunited. "You're safe now, son. You'll never be alone again." Maya stayed, too. No one asked her to, but she never left. She attended therapy with Ethan, helped him with his exercises, and filled the farmhouse with the laughter they had both forgotten how to make. David often caught her talking to the horses behind the barn or sitting under the oak tree sketching in an old notebook. She was still a child, yet she carried the gravity of someone who had seen too much. When the adoption papers arrived that spring, David didn't hesitate. "You saved my son," he told her quietly. "Now let me return the favor. You deserve a family too." Maya tried to answer, but tears stole her words. She just nodded, her small hand gripping his. For the first time, she believed that belonging wasn't just a dream people like her weren't allowed to have. Meanwhile, the world outside their little sanctuary kept turning. The Sterling Foundation, born from tragedy, became something bigger than anyone expected. What started as a recovery fund for survivors of trafficking grew into a national network of safe houses, counseling programs, and scholarships for children who'd lost everything. Every month, more families reached out, some broken, some healing, all searching for the same thing: hope. David no longer cared about profit margins or shareholder meetings. The company's headquarters now had a new wing dedicated to survivor advocacy, and the same board that once measured success in numbers now measured it in lives rebuilt. At the heart of every campaign, on every brochure, was a simple phrase: "The light always returns." It was Ethan's idea. He came up with it one afternoon during his therapy session. The therapist had asked what kept him going through the worst moments, and he'd looked out the window at the late afternoon sun spilling over the snow. Because no matter how long the night lasts, he said softly, the light always finds its way back. David wrote the words down, and they became the Foundation's motto, a message that spread far beyond anything he'd built before. But even as they rebuilt their lives, shadows lingered. The trial of Lucas Gray was public and brutal. David sat through every session, his jaw clenched, as prosecutors detailed the network's crimes. When the verdict came, life without parole, there was no satisfaction, only silence. Justice had been done, but justice could not give back what was stolen. Afterward, he walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight and realized something unexpected: forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant refusing to let evil write the last chapter. That night, Ethan asked if it was finally over. "Almost," David said, "but we don't get to forget. We get to do better." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, leaning against his father's shoulder. "Then let's do better," he said. Years passed. The farmhouse grew busier. Volunteers, journalists, therapists, all drawn by the work they were doing. Maya grew into a bright, driven young woman helping run the Foundation's outreach programs. Ethan, still walking with a slight limp, became a speaker for survivor rights. His voice, calm, deliberate, unflinching, held power that statistics never could. When he told his story, rooms fell silent. People didn't hear a victim. They heard a survivor who refused to live in darkness anymore. On the 7th anniversary of the Foundation, a ceremony was held in Chicago's Grant Park. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, and the crowd stretched farther than David could see. Maya stood beside him now, 17, confident and radiant. Ethan took the stage, looking every bit the young man his mother would have been proud of. He began quietly. "I was taken when I was 5, he said. "I spent years thinking I was forgotten, that I didn't matter. But I was wrong. My father never stopped searching. And when he found me, he didn't just save my life, he gave me back my future. And now I want to do that for others." The audience was silent except for the soft sound of people crying. Ethan looked out at the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You can take away someone's childhood, their home, even their freedom, but you can't take their light, not forever, because light always returns." When he stepped down, David met him at the edge of the stage, his eyes shining. "Your mom would be proud," he said. Ethan smiled. "So would mine." Maya added, slipping her hand into David's. As the sun set over the lake, casting gold across the city, the three of them stood together, no longer broken fragments of tragedy, but something whole, something rebuilt. The crowd began to light candles, one by one, until the entire park shimmered like a sea of stars. For a long moment, David just watched them, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. 7 years of loss had led to this, a moment of peace, of purpose, of light. He looked down at Ethan and Maya and whispered the words that had carried him through the darkness. "The light always returns." And this time it wasn't a promise. It was the truth. In the end, the story of David Sterling, Ethan, and Maya became more than a tale of loss and redemption. It became a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the healing power of love. From the storm-soaked streets where a frightened girl took a risk to help a stranger to the boardrooms and courtrooms where truth finally triumphed over corruption, every moment was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, compassion can rewrite fate. David found his son not just by wealth or influence, but through unyielding faith and a father's love that refused to die. Ethan learned that survival was not weakness, it was proof of courage. And Maya, the little girl who once believed she had no place in the world, discovered that family isn't always born, it's chosen through kindness and sacrifice. Their story shows that hope is not something you find, it's something you build piece by piece in the ruins of despair. No amount of darkness can overpower a single act of light. The scars they carried became symbols of endurance, reminders that healing doesn't erase pain, but transforms it into strength. Through their courage, hundreds of other children were saved, and what began as tragedy evolved into a movement of hope. The Sterling Foundation, a legacy that proved redemption is real, and that goodness, when chosen, can outlive evil. For all of us, watching this story holds a message that reaches beyond fiction. It asks us to see the invisible to protect the vulnerable, and to remember that every life, no matter how broken, still has value. If you've ever felt lost, if you've ever doubted that light can return, remember Ethan, Maya, and David. Their story reminds us that love is stronger than fear, and that family in any form can be the beginning of healing. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating emotional, inspiring stories that remind us all of the power of hope, love, and second chances.